What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to be showing you how to install the RTR Tactical Performance Suspension setup on your S550 Mustang. Before we get into today's video, I'd just like to suggest that maybe you guys possibly want to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notifications. That way you don't miss any of the other great stuff that we got coming up on this channel. And I know that you're going to love this video, so don't forget to give it a big thumbs up before you leave. And one thing I'd like to point out before we get started is you're going to notice in the video we are taking off the RTR Tactical Performance coilovers. Now the reason for this is I'm getting ready to sell the vehicle, so know that there's nothing wrong with these coilovers. I absolutely love them, but changing over the stock suspension from the RTR Tactical Performance shocks and dampeners will be exactly the same as it is changing over these coilovers. So what do you say we hop out in the driveway and get this started? Starting with the front strut, we're gonna need to remove three 15mm nuts here at the top, which hold your strut in place. Then we're gonna drop down, remove these two tree furs, which hold the brake line. The easiest way to remove your sway bar end links is to take a crescent wrench along with what I had is a 6 Torx and then turn that thing out. That way you don't have to worry about the bolt spinning. Next, we're going to remove the bolts that hold the knuckle in place. On one side it's a 19, the other side it's a 15. As you can see here, I put the nuts back on backwards because what we're going to do is tap these out. These threads that you can see here are splines, hold this bolt in place and stop it from turning, so you got to tap it out. That way you're going to be able to get it off of there. After you've done that, all you have to do is pull it free, and now all you have to do is pull out your front strut. Now here at the top, we are going to need to use your top hat. To remove this, what I have to do first is compress the spring. So I went to AutoZone, grabbed this spring compressor tool. As you can see, it's got a little nub right here that pops in and out. What you're going to do is adjust the size of this and then place it along your spring. Then you're going to push this pin through, which locks it in place on that particular coil. Do the same thing for the top of the spring and click it in place. As you can see here on my strut, I staggered them, but you don't necessarily have to do this. I did it for clearance issues to be able to get in there with the impact. Once in place, begin tightening it down to compress your spring. Once compressed, you're going to be able to see a gap in between your spring and your top hat. It's now time to remove the top hat. For the S550s, it's going to be a 23mm nut securing this in place. Once free, you can now remove your top hat as well as your spring isolator bushing. You'll then transfer your anti-squeak pad over from your stock shock. Make sure that this thing is properly seated. There's really only one way it can go on here, but make sure that the plastic tabs are fully inserted and locked in place. Then insert the supplied bump stop into the dust boot and slide this onto your strut. Slide the RTR Tactical Performance 1-inch lowering spring onto your strut, making sure it's properly seated. Then you're going to take your spring isolator boot and pop it on top of the spring. Insert your top hat onto the boot, and then take your supplied nut and put it on top of the strut. I just took the impact and tightened it down and it worked great. I didn't need the spring compressor anymore for this job. Now, when installing the spring without using the spring compressor, just make sure that it's seated all the way down. Also, if you need to, wait until it's on the vehicle and compress down with the weight of the vehicle, and then it makes it easier to zip it all the way down. You can also use that method to get the spring off if you don't want to go get a spring compressor. Slide the strut into place, hand tightening on the 15mm nuts, and then go back through in a clockwise formation to tighten them down. I use the impact. Do not over tighten these things. They can snap. Don't ask me how I know. After that, all you have to do is reinsert the knuckle bolts and tighten them down, and reinsert your brake line and pop it into place. And then finish up the job by putting back on your stock sway bar end link. Now, if you have a little bit of trouble getting in place, you can use a hammer or something to lift up the sway bar like I did here. Moving on to the rear, we're going to remove these two 18mm bolts holding in the shock mount. And then down below, we're going to remove this 15mm bolt and nut. With those out of the way, we can remove the shock. Now, since we're going to be reusing the shock mount, we're going to remove this. This one here is held in place with a 15mm nut. With the shock mount set off to the side, I moved on to removing the sway bar end links. For this, I used an 18mm wrench and a 6 Torx. I then used an 18mm impact and a 15mm socket to remove the rear upper control arm. This eliminates the need to have to lower the subframe. And since I was alone on this job, one thing I like to do is attach a tie-down strap or a bungee to the actual spring. That way when I step down onto the brake, I can pull out the spring by myself. Insert your stock isolator on top of the spring. Make sure it's tight and in place. Then you're going to make sure that the bottom of the spring is seated down here into the bottom of this insulator. You will need to drop the subframe on this one a little bit. I know we tried not to do that with pulling them out, but you will have to do that to get this spring back into place. Just make sure that it's held up with either a jack or a jack stance, and you're gonna be all good. For the RTR rear shocks, you will have to drill out your stock shock mount to 15-30 seconds. I do know this is smoking quite a bit, but trust me, when I wasn't filming with one hand, drilling with the other, I was lubricating it. Now add the supplied spacer and the bump stop, which is also drilled out to 15-30 seconds. Then place your shock mount on, as well as the supplied spacer, and your two nuts, which are gonna be torqued down to 22 foot-pounds each. Then starting with the base, I screwed up my two 15mm bolts into the shock itself, making sure that it faced out, looked all kinds of pretty, before securing it in place with the two top 18mm bolts. So much again for tuning into today's video. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, get the bell notifications, and give this video a big thumbs up before you leave. In the next video, a few other things are going to be handled on the car as well. So make sure to tune into that, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!